Oh, I'm a bit croaky this evening, but hopefully a good cup of tea will get me through. This series is all about universes, multiverses, planets, worlds, continents and cities. And we're delving not into specific games, but into the menus created for them. We'll be looking at where these settings came from, their major features, and why you should consider them for your own gaming experiences. Imagine a world not too far from our own on the surface, with all of its political mayhem, war, missing persons and corporate greed, but unlike our own world, I hope, running in the shadows behind it all are supernatural agencies. A chaotic and corrupting dark force guides the hands of some corporations, particularly those intent on destruction and polluting the planet. Against these forces fight entities tied to the natural world, potentially seeking to return things back to a state before cities and technology. The cities themselves are puppeteered by immortal beings of great power and predatory nature, pulling the strings of corporations and governments alike. Magic filters through the streets, in mostly subtle ways, manipulating on behalf of its students towards their own mysterious goals. Among these werewolves, vampires and magi lurk other beings of supernature, ghosts, fairies, mummies and demons. And among the general populace, with every misstep and unsubtle move these lurkers in shadows make, awareness grows, along with the knowledge and power necessary to defeat them. Imagine the dark side of our world painted even darker. A world in which we can visit from time to explore our darker sides from the safety of our imagination. That's a lot of darkness, but after all, today we are taking a look at the world of darkness. The story of the world of darkness begins with the game Ars Magica, designed by Jonathan Tweet and Mark Reinhagen, and first released in 1987. This game was originally published by Lion Rampant Games, which merged in 1991 with White Wolf magazine to form White Wolf Game Studios. Reinhagen used some elements from Ars Magica's setting, parallel to medieval Europe that assumes elements of folklore and esotericism are real, and pieced together a modern-day Earth with supernatural overtones, or, if you like, undertones. For one of the precepts of the world of darkness is that, by nature or imposition, the supernatural world's connection to the non-supernatural is subtle but imperceptible to most of its mortal inhabitants. Baking in aspects of mythology, including a large dollop of Judeo-Christian lore, Reinhagen's world-building absorbed a very broad span of sources, while retaining a core spine for which most of a predominantly Western audience of role-playing gamers would find familiar. The World of Darkness concept, in game terms, was to set several related games, all using the same foundational system, named the Storyteller system, each describing a different block of supernatural beings. The first of these games, Vampire: The Masquerade, was released in 1991 and, unsurprisingly, dealt with vampires. Additional games followed, initially on an annual basis and often tied to a theme of the year, which loaned focus for the year's game, and this year's supplements for the already released games in the Storyteller line. Werewolf: The Apocalypse in 1992, Mage: The Ascension in 1993, Wraith: The Oblivion in 1994, Changeling: The Dreaming in 1995, Vampire: The Dark Ages in 1996, Werewolf: The Wild West in 1997, Mage: The Sorcerer's Crusade and Kindred of the East in 1998, Hunter: The Reckoning in 1999, Mummy: The Resurrection in 2001, and Demon: The Fallen in 2002. The themed years began in 1995 with the Year of the Hunter, during which a vampire sourcebook dealing with the Inquisition was released. The Year of the Ally in 1997, along with the Book of Ghouls, and 1998 being the Year of the Lotus and coinciding with Kindred of the East. The Year of Reckoning in 1999, alongside the release of Hunter: The Reckoning. The Year of Revelations in 2000, the Year of the Scarab in 2001, along with Mummy: The Resurrection, the Year of the Damned in 2002, obviously tying in with Demon: The Fallen, and the Time of Judgment, spanning 2003 to 2004, which wrapped up the initial meta storyline for the initial run of games. A further game, Orpheus, was released in 2003 with connections to events occurring within the metaplot of Wraith the Oblivion. Rather than be part of the whole, Orpheus was given more to be its own thing, a distinct and finite game and storyline that, while tying into the world of darkness, was at the same time separate from the shenanigans of vampires, werewolves, fairies, mages and the rest. One of the things these games were famous for, or infamous for, was the sheer volume of material, splatbooks, if you will, by the gross. As the number of games in the line grew year by year, the number of splatbooks increased accordingly, and each themed year added to the subjects books would cover. In one year, then, there could be splatbooks detailing particular vampire clans, werewolf tribes, and so on, plus adventures for each game, plus descriptions of cities, plus how the year's theme affected the supernatural beings of each game, plus endless opportunities for what turned into an absolute metric ton of paperback books supporting the game lines. Add to this, to regular revisions, both of the games and of their splatbooks, especially when world events affected a particular bunch covered by a previous splatbook, and, well, you could drown in storyteller and World of Darkness material. An overarching theme of each game was that some impending doom hung over the supernaturals covered. For vampires, Gehenna. For werewolves, the apocalypse. For me, this is one of the strengths of the setting, and tapped in nicely with my love of Lovecraft and Call of Cthulhu. One of the premises of Lovecraft's works, and Chaosium's game based on it, is that the characters are fated against an impossibly unknowable and uncaring universe. It adds tension to the whole. Within the world of darkness, at least initially, the threats were vague, scribbled out in prophecies that spoke in riddles and portents. The overarching metaplot sifted through many of these portents, with players making such connections as they could with each event they witnessed, were involved directly in or heard about via news or grapevines. Considering all of the supernatural entities focused on within the various storyteller games are or approach superpowered levels of capabilities, this marching metaplot towards unknown disaster was an important frame of focus. Your character might take an active interest in seeking out the truths of the impending apocalypse, might simply experience the road to it as background, might rage against it, seeking methods of preventing or averting it, or any number of other interactions with the metaplot that could be thought of. And an ever-marching tide of books to sell, the metaplot and Doom endgame were the World of Darkness's goldmine. However, in 2004, things came to a head. White Wolf had decided that a new World of Darkness was required, with a new game, the storytelling rather than the storyteller system. Over the course of 2003 and 2004, each game line of the old World of Darkness faced its ultimate. The most ancient of vampires arose, the worm brought disaster, and everything generally went to hell in a handbasket. The period, the time of judgment, was treated separately within each game line, with a mind to ending the story, presumably ready for players to embrace the new system and its own game line. The new World of Darkness, the Chronicles of Darkness, was launched in 2004 with the game Vampire the Requiem, followed by Werewolf the Forsaken, Mage the Awakening, Promethean the Created, Changeling the Lost, Hunter the Vigil, Geist the Sin Eaters, and Mummy the Curse. These built on a core rulebook, a World of Darkness, rather than being presented as standalone games. The Chronicles of Darkness were also a complete reboot of the World of Darkness, not a continuation, not a so what happened after Gehenna. While the games were well presented, there were a number of people, including me, who chose this point in time to give the storytelling games a rest. Personally, there were far too familiar connections, for example Malkavians, in the new games that were actually entirely unfamiliar. World of Darkness Malkavians do not equal Chronicles of Darkness Malkavians, leading to not only needing to learn a new system, but to unlearn chunks of lore and ingrained concepts from the old order in order to fully get to grips with the new. These new books were beautiful, but for me, just too much effort. So, let's skip forward instead to 2011. 20 years after Vampire the Masquerade appeared, White Wolf announced V20, Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. This version of the game rejigged and compiled content from across the original line into a hefty core rulebook and relaunched the old World of Darkness as an entity. V20 didn't continue the metaplot of its ancestor, but revisited it, representing the rules to capture that original style of play of a coterie of vampires out to prey on the world. The license to Vampire the Masquerade and other titles in the World of Darkness line shifted to Onyx Path Publishing, a company founded in 2012 by Richard Thomas. Onyx Path continued to publish and republish, via Drive-Thru RPG, materials for the old World of Darkness, and then continued to do so. They were originally going to work on a 4th edition of Vampire the Masquerade, but were pipped to it when, in 2015, White Wolf itself was bought by Paradox Interactive. Paradox themselves produced a 5th edition, V5, distributed by Metaplot Entertainment. That was, at last, a continuation of the Metaplot post-Judgment. Spoiler alert, it turns out total annihilation didn't happen after all. And so, via a few other twists and turns that involve the usual bouts of license evolution and an unfortunate slat of unpleasantness, we arrive at the state of the World of Darkness today. That is, Onyx Path continue to support the pre-Judgment era of the World of Darkness, along with V20 and W20 and M20 and so on, with some new original materials both within the pre-Judgment and post-Judgment V5 era. Modiphius continue to support and develop V5, and Onyx also continue to support the Chronicles of Darkness editions. White Wolf are still around, more or less, in name only. The World of Darkness is our own world cast into shadow. Supernatural entities are real, and are actively involved in the turn of history's wheel. It is full of politics, subtle manipulations, explosive violence, and conspiracies of superhuman and supernatural scope. It is a playground of monsters, and an arena in which we, as players, can explore our monsters within, from the safety of our imaginations. And this last is why many of the World of Darkness games are tagged as being games of personal horror. They, and the World of Darkness as a setting, works best when we entertain our beasts through the lenses of vampires, werewolves, and its other inhabitants. A storyteller can have fun at the edges, crafting intrigues with those higher up the food chain than the player characters, but ultimately they and their machinations, more so than in a fantasy setting, must create the crucible in which the players directly interact. While the world is capable of supporting sweeping epics, it is best operated, in my opinion, with a sense of claustrophobia. A single city and its surrounds is usually enough to support a lengthy campaign, a chronicle, in the game's vernacular. Player characters should get to know the personages of their city and the pecking order in which they must operate, and, if fortunate, elevate themselves through it. The setting carries an aura of menace and threat, and this should come over in play. Whether this is via the old World of Darkness and its hurtling towards the prophesied Gehenna and Apocalypse, or within the post-apocalypse or New World with their own plots, within which the player characters can remain pawns or seek to raise themselves to knights, bishops, or even kings, and even kings are subject to being hunted by those above, below, and alongside them. In many ways, the World of Darkness in full bloom is not for the faint-hearted. It is not Hammer horror, although I have witnessed chronicles that have headed in that direction. It can be Hammer, or Twilight, or any other such if you so choose, but I feel it is best used as its own thing, with the players taking on the roles of super-powerful creatures, horrific and somewhat caged by their own hierarchies and limitations, attempting to retain humanity and interact somewhat with the human world while spiralling ever downwards into the embrace of the beasts within. From this, you may detect my personal preference for the vampires of this world. But each type of supernatural inhabitant has its own unique place and approach. Just make sure you always remember that they are games, the World of Darkness is a fantasy, and you are, after all, merely human. If you are more inclined towards high-action, high-fantasy, heroic games of overcoming evil and smiting the bad guys, probably not. Here is not a game in which player characters are the good guys. Even when cast against greater evil, they are still, ultimately, darker shades of grey themselves. If you enjoy tales of anti-heroes doomed to succumb to their own evils, perhaps resisting or succumbing to them with a narrative of dark psychology, then yes, absolutely, you'll probably take to the setting and the game like a duck to water. Either way, the World of Darkness is one of the better depictions of a supernatural world in gaming. Not quite as nihilistic as that presents with Call of Cthulhu, not as superficial as Ravenloft, or some other games that we will cover on this channel in due course. When we do, you'll see what I mean by superficial. It's not as denigrating as it might seem. So, to delve into an imagined, darkened underbelly of what our real world could be like if the monsters were real, and if you were one of those monsters yourself, it is an excellent playground to work with.